Well,
So
I think you got two new customers on this one, buddy.
Dude, I am kicking myself in the ass for a Rogan podcast where I got too high and just said, nah, I'm going to pass on the Bitcoin, gentlemen. Send it over to Red Band.
I did the same thing. I'm betting Bitcoin. F this shit.
I want to get those. I want to buy the computers that mine Bitcoin.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you understand the value proposition of Bitcoin in 2020, you are incredibly early. Let me tell you why. Anthony Pompliano just did an hour and a half on Bill Burr and Bert Kreischer's Bert podcast, answering all their questions about money and about Bitcoin, basically cluing these guys in to not only the value proposition, but also getting these guys excited about Bitcoin. That was surprising. In my opinion, this is what you have to do to get on the Joe Rogan podcast. This is what you have to do to get on the Joe Rogan podcast. I'm going to explain that in just a second. The point is, there's something much bigger that's happening here. But to give you a taste of what these guys actually talked about, let me show you two short clips from the beginning of this episode and then two short clips from the end of this episode. Again, this was an hour and a half long, but just to give you a taste of what these guys talked about.
Yeah, look what's going on in Lebanon right now, right? Everyone always talks about
what's going on with Bert Kreischer. Bert Kreischer hasn't said in his tour bus.
I'm fascinated. I've never realized any of this. I feel like I'm just listening. Keep going.
So,
Tell me about Lebanon.
By the way, Bert's gonna go light all his dollars on fire by the end of this.
Bro,
I love Bert. Just do me a favor. Can you just ease him into this information? Bert is the coolest dude I know. Please don't make him who I was 10 years ago when I was carving the Federal Reserve into my pumpkins on Halloween. Just please don't turn him into the all I was.
So in Lebanon, for example, right now, their currency has fallen more than 50% against the dollar. And so what you end up doing is Bitcoin, and why everyone's so excited about it, there's a lot of people who call it like the people's money, right? Or a deflationary type asset. All that means is that no one can print it. The United States can't print more. China can't print more. Russia can't print more. Any other country, dictator, politician, nobody has control over it. And so if there's a set amount, 21 million that'll ever get created, basically you're protected from all of that inflation and the printing of money and all that crazy shit. And so people are slowly just opting to this new asset and saying, look, I don't want to play this game anymore. I'm going to kind of peacefully protest it by going and buying this other asset and putting my wealth there.
I like it. Let's jump an hour later now. I want to show you how this podcast ended. TLDR, these guys seem pretty excited to do more research into Bitcoin.
And you create this whole bubble, and when the whole thing goes to shit, you still get a bonus, and you're only going to give me $250 off my $1 million? How is that fucking legal? I'm betting Bitcoin. F this shit.
I want to get those. I want to buy the computers that mine Bitcoin.
Yeah, you can buy them. I'll send you a link to it. But again, here's the crazy part: is Bitcoin used to be worth one Bitcoin 0.3 cents, less than 1 penny. Today it is worth $9,000 in 11 years.
I know that's ridiculous. That is ridiculous growth. You just don't see that.
The only way it grows is because demand increases. There's a finite supply.
Well, I think you got two new customers on this one, buddy.
Dude, I am kicking myself in the ass for a Rogan podcast where I got too high and just said, nah, I'm going to pass on the Bitcoin, gentlemen. Send it over to Red Band.
I did the same thing. Look, I'm still going to do a bunch of research, which I suggest everybody does. But, we're coming up on it here. I don't want people's friggin' heads to explode with this. Do you have anything in closing?
Okay, let's talk about the significance of this, because something much bigger is happening with this podcast. And if you're not paying attention in 2020, you probably should be, because Bitcoin and media like this around Bitcoin, it's going to get a whole lot bigger. Let me explain what I'm talking about. And first of all, let me just say up front, kudos to Anthony Pompliano. Not only was he able to bro out with these guys, but he was also able to articulate what money is, the value proposition of Bitcoin, and more than that, make it fun. And these guys were actually excited about it. So that was really cool. So kudos to Pomp. And basically what I'm saying is this is only going to get bigger. It's my theory that this is a stepping stone for the Joe Rogan podcast, where the next step will be for Anthony Pompliano to be a guest on the Joe Rogan podcast to talk about Bitcoin. Let me explain why I think this. Pompliano just did an hour and a half on a relatively unknown podcast. Yes, both of these comedians are famous in their own right. Yes, both of these comedians separately have famous podcasts. But this podcast, the Bill Bert podcast, relatively unknown. Only 20 episodes deep. In fact, Pomp was only the 20th guest on the podcast. So my question to you is, what do you think's more likely? Do you think it's likely that Anthony Pompliano just happens to be a fan of the first 19 episodes and emailed the Bill Bert podcast, which again, let's be honest, relatively unknown? Or isn't it more likely that Anthony Pompliano is in talks with the Joe Rogan podcast? And basically what they do, I know this for a fact. If you don't know Joe Rogan, but you want to get on his podcast and you're like a B-list celebrity, I've heard B-list celebrities talk about this, that when you email the Joe Rogan Experience and you don't know Joe and you're trying to get on, obviously they can't get everybody on. But what they do is they say, well, Joe will look into you. But if you're interested, we'll invite you to do one of Joe's friends' podcasts. They're looking for guests. They're looking for content. They go, hey, Joe is really busy. But if you're interested in being on The Fighter and the Kid, we got Ari Shafir's podcast. Or hey, Bill and Bert have this new podcast if you want to do that. If Joe Rogan tunes into you, and then if Joe Rogan likes you, then you have a greater chance of being invited on the Joe Rogan Experience. And this is what I think that Anthony Pompliano is doing. Not that it isn't an accomplishment in itself to get with Bill Burr and Bert Kreischer, because it is. All I'm saying is something much bigger is happening. And if you own Bitcoin, or even if you simply just understand the value proposition that is Bitcoin, you are incredibly early.
How much does one Bitcoin cost?
It's like $9,000 right now, but you don't have to buy a full.
So wait a second. So so one coin is $9,000. If I want to buy a Snickers bar with the Bitcoin, how do I do that? If one of them is worth $9,000.
So one Bitcoin is worth $9,000, but just like $1 can be split into 100 pennies, this basically can get split into 100 million smaller units. They call those units Satoshi.
Then why is the buy-in so high? Why, if I'm somebody watching this and I only got $300, how come I can't buy $300 or 50%, $150 worth of Bitcoin?
You can. So you can go in and just buy a fractional piece.
So it's pretty apparent that Joe Rogan is going to do a Bitcoin podcast, a full episode dedicated to Bitcoin sometime this year. In the past year, he's talked about Bitcoin sporadically and cryptocurrency. I mean, Joe Rogan used to do dedicated Bitcoin episodes all the time with Andreas Antonopoulos. The last time that Joe Rogan had on Andreas Antonopoulos was before the 2017 bubble. It was actually in 2016, right before things started to get crazy. If you want to be part of the movement, if you want to get Joe Rogan to do a Bitcoin podcast, let me tell you how you can help the movement. Number one, like this video. Maybe the most important thing you can do, give this video a like. Number two, take the link to this video and post it everywhere. Post it on social media, send it to a friend. Say, hey, you better look into Bitcoin before Joe Rogan does this episode, because the last time Joe Rogan did something like this, that was 2016, a year later, Bitcoin pumped like crazy and Joe Rogan's only bigger. Everything's only bigger. And then the number three thing is take the link to this episode, post it on Twitter, tag Pomp, tag Joe Rogan, get the buzz going, get the grassroots movement, or, do whatever you want. Just, let's start talking about it. Let's get this information out there to as many people as possible. Guys, I appreciate you. It's going to be a great year.
Let me ask you this. If Bitcoin was a band, where are they in their career right now? As far as the belief of Bitcoin, did they got one hit? Did they come out with Appetite for Destruction and Instant Classic? Because I remember when it first came out, there was a big swell of publicity about it. And then I thought a couple of guys got whacked. I don't know. I fall asleep watching TV a lot, so I might be combining, reality with fictional TV shows on Netflix. But where is it right now as far as the belief system? Is there any sort of stat out there on the world population scale? Like, how many people believe in Bitcoin versus people going that's fucking crazy. Don't take these devalued American dollars and buy Bitcoin. I thought I was riveting and interested. He was actually frozen.
I think Bitcoin is like Cardi B. you've heard of her, but you've never heard of any of her songs.
I wouldn't say that. I mean, I know who Cardi B is.
Yeah, but what name of song?
You know what annoys me about Cardi B is she's funnier than I am. She's hilarious. Forget about all the rap and all that shit that she does, which is great and everything. But she's hilarious.
To Anthony, I had said to Bill that Bitcoin is Cardi B. You know who she is, but you aren't familiar with her songs.